This is the Tohatsu MFSD 20, otherwise known as a 20 horsepower fuel injection model. This one is from 2023, but I believe they started production of these around sort of 2020 and they're still ongoing now. I've racked up just over 100 hours on it in the last year of owning it, so it's time to give it its first major service. You'll have to bear with me today if I'm not getting my angles great because I'm trying to do this on a tripod. But we're going to start off by removing the cowling. To drain the oil, all we need is a 16mm socket on a ratchet here, and then a pan to collect the waste oil. I'm going to start off by loosening it with the ratchet, and then I'm going to hold my oil pan here to collect anything that comes out. Well, of course there's going to be oil that comes out. To make life easier when it comes to removing the oil filter, I believe this is the ECU here, but I'm going to move it out of the way just so that we've got a little bit more room to work in there. And it's just a single 10mm bolt that's holding it in place there. We want to be careful that we don't drop anything down inside the outboard. All right, let's go ahead and remove the oil filter here. It's pretty obvious where it is. It even says oil filter on it. We've made a bit of space here now so that we can get our hands in. Sometimes you'll just be able to undo these by hand. This one was actually really tight on there, so I've got one of these pipe wrenches here, and I've just going in there like that, and then give myself a little bit more space, and I'm just doing some little turns with the pipe wrench to loosen it off. There can be a bit of oil that comes out from the filter, so I'm going to try and catch that with the rag as I remove it. Okay, that one's there, and I'm just going to make sure that I pull the filter up as I take it out. Don't point it down because there could still be some oil on the filter there. So when it comes to fitting the new oil filter, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bit of oil that's there, and I'm just going to run it around the edge of the seal. And the reason for doing this is that if you reapply the filter with a seal that's been oiled, when you come to take it off again next time, it's going to come off a lot easier, and hopefully there won't be the need for using a pipe wrench. Line up the filter there. This is where it's nice to have a bit more space from removing or adjusting the position of the ECU there. And then it's just a clockwise direction to refit the filter. Of course, you've got to put a little bit of pressure, a bit of torque in there to get it sitting nice and tight. That seal has to be squished nicely against the housing there. Don't be in a rush with any of this, because if you drop a bolt in there, guys, it's going to be really hard to get it out again. So just take your time with it. So whilst we're around this side of the outboard, we're going to go ahead and change the two spark plugs here. To start off with, we're going to slide off. Now it might be on there a little bit tight, but it is just pushed on. This is the fuel water separator. She's on there fairly tight, but that's just going to pop out of the way there. And we'll just sort of leave that there to one side. And we can now see both of our HT leads going into the spark plugs. And of course, when we put this back together, we want to be sure of which one goes where. We don't want to cross these over. So now could be a good time to mark one of these with a cable tie or something like that. I've actually got my tachometer here wrapped around the top one. So that's going to be my indication of where it goes. And I'm just being careful because I don't want to pull, there we go. I don't want to pull the outboard down off the stand. So you could just do them one at a time, but I'm going to go ahead and take both off here. Okay, so we're going to be removing the spark plugs now, and actually the socket that I have didn't fit in the gap there. It was too thick of a socket because it's designed for taking off wheel nuts. So instead I'm using this rather crude sort of multi-purpose tool here, but it does have the right size socket on for these small spark plugs. And I'm not actually sure on the exact size here, but it's, yeah, you generally want to get a spark plug socket. I just can't find mine. I'm sure I've got one because I've done this job before and I don't remember having to use this, but in typical fashion it has been lost. So we're just going in here now with the crude tool, and in all honesty it doesn't matter too much because we just need to give them a few turns with that socket and then we can do the rest by hand. So we're coming to fit the new spark plugs now, and I'm just making sure that they are in fact the right ones. We can tell here by the codes. And the other thing to check with spark plugs is the gap. So there is a device that you can use to adjust the gap of the spark plug, but just by eyeballing it, the replacement, the new ones look like they're gaps to the correct level already. So these are going to be fine to go ahead and put straight in. And I'm just consulting the packaging of the new spark plugs, and it gives us a tightening torque of 15 to 20 Newton meters. So of course it would be optimal to fit these with a torque wrench and the right socket instead of just using the tool I've used, but I'm pretty happy they're in there nice and tight. So we're going to go ahead and refit the HT leads. I'm going to do the bottom one first just so that I've got a bit of space, and I had my way of memorizing it with the tachometer wire wrapped around the top one. So we're going to go ahead now and push these on. You should hear a pop. There we go. All right, well, the next step is to fill the engine oil. So I'm going to refer to the owner's manual whilst I have myself a cuppa. So according to the manual here, I'm actually going to use the whole litre that comes in the service kit. I honestly thought it was a bit less than that, but if it says that in the owner's manual, that's what we're going to do. Okay, so it should be fairly obvious where the fill is for the engine oil. There is this yellow cap here, which has that universal oil sign on. And of course, we have refitted the drain plug. The filter is nice and tight, so there's nowhere for that oil to leak out. And according to the owner's manual, we're going to go ahead and empty the entire contents of this 1 litre container. Obviously there's nothing wrong with just doing an oil change, can't do any harm. Then that's what you're looking for, the 10 weight 30. Even though the manual dictates the amount of oil that we're going to use, it's still a good idea to come to the dipstick. The dipstick up here. We're going to take that one out, give it a wipe off, and then our indicators here are the 2 dots. So as we've just filled it up, we should be somewhere near that top dot. Yeah, we are. It's probably not going to show up on camera, but we're literally just below that top dot there. So I'm happy that it has the right amount of oil in. And of course, this is something that's really important to make sure that the oil is filled up to the correct level. You don't want to overfill, you don't want to underfill. Okay, so now we're going to drain the oil from the lower unit or the gearbox. And in the start of the video, I showed a really large flathead screwdriver, but it's hard to use such a long handled screwdriver to get under there. So we're going to use the same sort of little multi-tool that we use for taking the spark plugs off here, because it's got a nice big flat head, and then I can really get a good grip on there. And this is the oil. There's two screws that we need to think about when we're changing the gearbox oil. There's the lower one here, and then there's the oil level up here. And we're going to start off by removing the bottom screw here. But the idea is, if you remove the bottom one first, leave the top one in, the vacuum should hold and the oil shouldn't really leak out in a great quantity until the top one's removed. And then when I go ahead and remove the top one here, then it should all leak out or drain out pretty quickly. Now is probably a good time to point out that if your oil is milky, whether it be from your lower unit or the engine, then that is a sign that you have water ingress into the oil. So you want to start thinking about what seals might have gone bad. But that's something to cover in another discussion. For now, we're just focusing on the service. So put those caps to one side. In fact, one thing to point out that's happened here is the washer has actually stayed in the hole there. So we're going to take that washer out because we don't want two washers on top of each other. Obviously the seal's not going to be very good then. And we can see here on the bottom screw that the washer came out with it. The other one didn't. Well, whilst that gearbox oil is draining, we're going to go ahead and prepare to remove the lower unit so that we can change the impeller. And we have to first disconnect this shaft here, which is essentially the gear selector. And there are two nuts on that shaft. And we're going to need an 8mm spanner there to come in and loosen the long nut. And then we're going to go ahead and screw that one right up out of the way. That long nut there, you can't quite see it because I've that one there where my finger is, that's what holds the gear selector together. So that's removed now. In order to remove the lower unit, there are 4 bolts located here by the oil fill level, and we're going to use a 10mm socket on a ratchet to remove the 4 bolts here. And just be aware that once these come loose, the whole lower unit could drop down. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're taking these ones out. Just be careful that you don't drop the whole lower unit all at once. So with those 4 bolts removed, we can start to slide out the lower unit. May be a little bit awkward, like mine is, because of the stand. I'm going to have to tilt the outboard now to slide it out the rest of the way. The impeller is located in the water pump housing here, and as with most parts on these engines, it is a 10mm bolt holding it in place there. So we're just going to go ahead and pop this guy out. Let's see what he looks like. If you're struggling like I am with this, then you can use a pair of pliers. Of course, that can help to get the old one out, but you wouldn't necessarily want to use it on the new one. And that is the old impeller there, and that looks really, there's nothing wrong with that impeller at all. You know, there's no cracks in the rubber, but it's a year old, so we're gonna swap her out for the new one. Fantastic. And then we're going to go ahead and replace this one inside the housing, which is a bit of a squeeze. If we just give it a twist as we do so, then it should slide in to place like that. And we want to make sure that it's sitting flush in there. Obviously, if it's sticking out, then it's not going to slide down to the shaft and seal properly. So then we're going to use that little cutout there, slide it back down and line up the cutout on the impeller. Sometimes they can be a little bit stiff. There we go, with the tab that's on the shaft, and then that's going to sit there nicely. So we're going to use some of this marine grease, and it is important to use marine rated grease in these applications, and we're just going to go ahead and apply some to the shaft here, and that's just going to help it slide on a lot easier. This is a hard part, pushing the lower unit back up inside the engine, so yeah, a little bit of grease can really help. Filling the gear oil can be the messiest and trickiest part of this whole service, in my opinion, when they come in these little squeezy bottles. So what I've done is I've emptied them into this bottle, which is for the gearbox oil. And then one thing that I think is an essential purchase if you're going to do your own servicing is one of these little pumps here that just screws on there, and then it's got a threaded part there which I can screw into the fill thread, and it's just going to mean that I don't have to swap over containers halfway. If you try and do it from those, it's just going to be a mess. So yeah, try and get yourself one of these little pumps. Okay, we can see now that the oil is coming out from the oil level hole there, so we can go ahead and cap that one off. Always put that one in, and it will create a vacuum then and stop it from leaking out down the bottom. Okay, so I'm pretty much done with the service of this Tohatsu now. If you were to do this yourself, you could get it done in 2 hours. It's not an unreasonable time frame to carry out the service. And as you can see, you don't really need too many tools to do it, and it really does save yourself quite a bit of money in the long run. So let's just talk a little bit about this engine and my experience of using it over the years. Now, a few things to watch out for if you have one of these engines and you've been using it for a while already. Problems that I've had with it in the past. This is over two of these outboards over 5 years. I've had the end caps here. This is for the hydraulic steering, if you were to have it fitted. I've had these end caps come loose before, and I think it's just because they're sort of nylon material, so over time they can vibrate, and yeah, if they fall off these little end caps, it just leaves the bare metal exposed. So it's worth checking that they're tight if you've been using your outboard for a little while. Not that it has a great deal of function. And then one thing I will show you is I've actually had the gear selector here. I've had that disconnect from the shaft here, and all that happened was this bolt inside had come loose, and then it just hopped off of the selector there. And even though it was an easy field fix, it happened at the worst time. Typically, as it does, it happened as I was pushing off from the beach. It was a fair shore dump,
and as I started the engine, and as I went to put it in gear, it disconnected, and then I got dumped back on the beach. But thankfully the boat was upright. So yeah, another thing, if you've been using one of these engines for a little while, just make sure that bolt is done up tight, and therefore it's not going to disconnect at an inconvenient time like that. And then another thing that I've had is the HT lead bump off the end of the spark plug whilst I was out on a really rough day, and I come crashing down on a wave, and it just, the whole impact has just bumped it off pretty much, and then I was down to 1 cylinder. So again, if you're doing checks on your outboards, just make sure that HT lead is pressed in really tight. But apart from that, I've had no issues in the 5 years of running these outboards, and yeah, it is a really good smooth outboard. One other thing I should mention actually is the trim pin down here. So this is on a little spring. We come around the other side, there's a small bar there that keeps it across, and I'm not sure why this happens, but sometimes when you go to tilt the outboard, that spring, it sort of engages itself, and that trim pin almost pops itself out. So it can be quite easy to lose that trim pin sometimes. It just seems to be a bit of a random occurrence, but yeah, just keep an eye on it is what I'd advise. And finally, the question I get in a lot of my videos is, where did I get this cover from? Let's just take a look at the cover. It is made by OCA Outboard Covers in Australia, and I think that literally just stands for Outboard Covers Australia. And what they'll do is they'll hand make a cover for your cowling, and I chose to have the Tohatsu writing on the side, give them a little bit of free advertisement. And you can have the horsepower displayed on the back there. If you want my advice, never put the horsepower on it, because some slipways will charge you by horsepower. I could say that's a 9.8 horsepower. I'm sure most people wouldn't question it, but yeah, great outboard covers. If you're going to be moving your outboard around a lot in and out of a vehicle, that will save the cowling. Mine looks brand new underneath, and if you're doing it a lot, if you're using your outboard a lot, that cowling will get scratched really badly over time, and it will just make the whole thing look quite tired. Whereas if you keep that on it, it keeps it nice underneath if you ever come to sell it. But I also think those outboard covers just, they look really smart, and it's a, you know, £100 investment on which is a small cost for these outboards really. So if you have found this video helpful, please drop a like. Let me know in the comments. If you're not subscribed to the channel already, please go and do so. And I'll see you on the next video, where hopefully I've got a rod in my hand instead of a screwdriver. All right, cheers guys, thank you very much.